Bottom line is because it's not working.
Linda McMahon talking about the Department of Education when she's being tasked with one job: to dismantle it and end its reign over the indoctrination centers of America. Welcome to another edition of Spark the Conversation. This is your host, Mark the Spark, bringing you today's news. So our focus on Linda McMahon is going to be our first topic today. She is the delegate for running the Department of Education. Donald Trump handpicked her to, with one singular task, which we'll hear him talk about in a second, to dismantle the Department of Education, what I call the leader of the indoctrination centers of America, just like I said in the opening. This department really has done nothing for America's education. You can look at a clear trend of, since its inception, the education in America has only gone on a severe decline. And I think this is a perfect example of centralization of government power being completely destructive. When I talk about this diseconomy of scale, which is a idea from Thomas Sowell in his book, Basic Economics, that applies across the board to a bunch of organizations. And we're seeing this across the board in all the departments of the federal government, how as they've gotten so large, they've gotten out of control, and it is so easy to hide the fraud, waste, and abuse in these departments. And we're seeing that on a large scale. Here's Donald Trump talking about why he picked her to be the designee for this position.
Education Department. Why nominate Linda McMahon to be the Education Department Secretary if you're going to get rid of the Education Department?
Because I told Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job. I want her to put herself out of a job. Education Department. So we're ranked number 40 out of 40 schools, right? We're ranked number 1 in cost per pupil. So we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world, and we're ranked at the bottom of the list. We're ranked very badly. And what I want to do is let the states run schools. I believe strongly in school choice, but in addition to that, I want the states to run schools, and I want Linda to put herself out of a job.
So do you think that's something you can do with an executive order? Or
I'd like to be able to do it. Yeah, I would like to be able to. Look, if I could give the schools back to Iowa and Idaho and Indiana and all these places that run properly, there's many of them.
So there's Donald Trump also talking about why the Department of Education is not really needed. He says, I want to send it back to the states. And really, the Department of Education, like so many federal government agencies, are really just a pass-through. It's just a whole bunch of people staffed at a higher level to take the money of people, all the states collectively, and then turn it around and give it back to the states again. So it's just a bunch of administrative fees, a bunch of roadblocks that states have to jump through. And then if the Democrat Party is in power, we know how they use that as a cudgel for these states to follow their policies and whatever they think is important at the time. And a lot of times what they'll do is they steal money from everybody and they reallocate it to the states who are doing their bidding, who are indoctrinating the way they want, who are teaching the things that they say. And they have all these pet projects. They'll give out grants for like LGBTQ programs, or they'll hold back people's funding. They take the money from the states and then they hold it back from giving it back to them because they won't allow boys to play in girls' sports. Here's Linda McMahon talking about why it's not working.
Bottom line is because it's not working. Department of Education was set up in 1980, and since that time we have spent almost $1 trillion, and we have watched our performance scores continue to go down. I do believe that it is a responsibility to make sure that our children do have equal access to excellent education. I think that that is best handled at the state level, closest to the states, working with state administrators, teachers, parents, who should have input into their curriculum.
All good points with a common theme. The power should go back to the states. And this is also how we resolve some of the division, the divisiveness within people who believe different ways, is give the power back to the smaller areas of government who can have more control over, the what their people in that state or that locality want. I mean, I would argue further to go down to the county level, but I don't think that ever will happen. But, the smallest locality that you can restrict the power to, the more that it's going to be controlled by the people who believe in it. I mean, that's one of the ideas of community policing, right? In cities, you have to have some kind of, in most locations actually, you have to live within that township or that city in order to be a police officer. That's so that the beliefs of that community are reflected in the police force. Again, when I was talking about, the federal government being able to force states or try to force states to take boys into girls sports in Title IX, they used this against states and held their money from them. This is why taxation is theft, because they can take their money by the power of force, right? People with guns will come for you if you do not pay your taxes. That is the power of force. And if you didn't follow their guidelines in Title IX, where they changed them, say boys could play in girls sports, they would hold that money against you. Here's Linda McMahon talking about that.
Back to what Title IX was originally established to do, and that was to protect sexual discrimination. And women should feel safe in their locker rooms. They should feel safe in their spaces. They shouldn't have to be exposed to men undressing in front of them. I think I heard one person the other day say, well, the guys just should hold the shower curtain in front of them so that they aren't exposing themselves. I mean, really, that's just not what we should be doing. We want to make sure that Title IX, which is the law, is enforced.
And in contrast, here's one of the lefties, Randy Weingarten, who is the president of the Teachers Federation, American Federation of Teachers. She's talking about some of the chaos, supposed chaos, from the ending of the Department of Education or the defunding of the Department of Education. And she kind of claims that she's not a fan of bureaucracy or whatever, but just look at the contrast of what is leading the left, because they all have the same opinions similar to this, and in comparison to Linda McMahon, who we just watched.
What we're hearing is just complete chaos and, frankly, a whole bunch of cruelty, because at the end of the day, you can make departments more efficient, and I'm not a big believer in bureaucracy, but this feels like, as Elon Musk said to you, evisceration. So here's a guy who has hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts from these departments, and he's not touching them, but what he's doing is really taking money from kids who really need it in the field. And these departments, yes, they can be much more efficient, but that's what the education department does. It gives out money to kids so you can feed them a decent lunch, so we can have, tutors for reading, so you can actually help kids with math problems. That's what's going on right now.
So basically, according to her, the only thing Department of Education does is make sure kids get meals, which is crazy, because it seems to me like they should be doing something completely different and making sure kids are educated, which we can see by statistics. Their reading scores, math scores, science scores are on the steep decline, lower than they've ever been. And of course, teachers want to blame cell phones. And I'm not saying cell phones don't have a piece in it. Some of it is a piece of it. Parents are also a piece of it. But you can at the very least say that the addition of Department of Education has not helped, but hurt the education of our children. And the fact that they're pushing these crazy left ideologies is not helping and is really, really dangerous. Here's some clips. These came out of Chris Ruffalo, who's done a great job in this whole mission, and Chris Ruffo has been following Department of Education very closely, getting clips of seminars that people have attended, things that are going on. These are our educators. These are Randy Weingarten's people. These are the educators of America. And this is the kind of crap that they're being taught. This is the kind of stuff that they are teaching your children.
Right. If we think about the idea that the system was created, in particular, the system was created by white men for white men to have and maintain and build power and resources for themselves. And in particular, I'm talking about resources of wealth. We see that, right? We see it over and over again. And then what we're seeing, in the country with people not only defending their whiteness, but like really violently fighting for the maintenance of white supremacy, and going to extraordinary lengths, politically, economically, et cetera, to maintain it, is a whole new level of saying, you don't get to change this.
Just some crazy stuff that these educators are teaching and being taught and forcing on your and my children. Unreal. Pay attention, parents, because this is happening in your school in one way or another. This continues, this discussion about racism and the power dynamic between whites and blacks. It continues on in another clip here.
I have two white children, two white daughters. They are 7 and 9. And when I think about that question that you asked, what does it mean that's different? I think about how I'm really trying to force my children to reside in reality. So that means that they are going to really push through all of the white fantasy that is just part of what it means to grow up in a white supremacist society. As gets talked about quite a lot, is that whites have a lot of fantasy about what it means to be white and how maybe they deserve everything that they've gotten. There's a lack of history. Their children are very innocent, and that innocence follows them throughout their lives, through schooling and in every single institution. Whereas children of color are, even in some cases, as Ferguson studied, are adultified at very young ages, not even seen as children, as innocents that deserve loving correction or the same nurturing. And so when I think about how to interrupt that with my own children, it comes up in many different ways. One of the things I think that white parents need to not be afraid to do, and which I know that they are, is to actually name racism as a power dynamic between white people and people of color.
This mini presentation is understanding the importance of sex work in the LGBT plus community and in LGBT youth survival, because especially for queer and trans people of color, and most emphatically Black trans women, this often is a means of income. And by not talking about it and avoiding talking about that, we're actually making that worse, and making it easier for people to be stigmatized who need support. So we want to make sure that that's something as educators that we're aware of, so that we're able to support our communities. Next slide, please. And again, something that was sort of hinted at earlier, but like the technical term for it is what I want to address here is adultism. Hopefully folks in this space have already heard this term, but if you haven't, quick definition is that adultism is the oppression experienced by children and young people at the hands of adult and adult produced / adult tailored systems. This is a quote from an anthropologist who studies adultism. So what that means in layman's terms is that adultism is the larger cultural understanding that children should not be listened to, should not be heard, should not be respected, because people who have seniority of age kind of automatically are trusted and seen as being more knowledgeable and seen as being the people who should be guiding and telling children what they should be doing.
And this kind of talk, this adultism thing, saying that children should be respected, they should be able to make their own decisions, they should be able to have their own autonomy, is ultimately the schools telling parents that you should not be able to control your kids, but we'll control your kids, we'll make the best decisions for them. You're not capable. The power rides with us. It's a really sickening and dangerous trend and needs to be stopped. Parents, I'm telling you, you need to pay attention to what's going on in your school and go to your school board meetings or watch what's happening there very closely, because this is coming to a town near you. Here's another Department of Education funded NGO that's pushing talking about concentration camps, like the school is a concentration camp designed to harm colored children. I mean, they're talking again about the fact that everyone's racist. You can't escape it. These are really, really sick ideologies that do not belong anywhere near our children.
We are working in a structurally racist from its beginning system. It's like sometimes I feel like I'm working in this concentration camp and there's the gas chambers everywhere and I'm part of that system. And so you have to make that decision about how far you're willing to push, or whether you need to get out and do something different.
Anti-racist teachers recognize, one, that the system is designed, the public education system is designed to harm Black and brown children. It is not designed in their best interest. It never has been. And look, I benefited from public education. I get that. I'm the exception, not the rule.
We are really heavily focused on how do we get police out of schools. We also heavily focus on how do we defund policing and SROs and all that.
Ibram X. Kendi has done a great job of putting words to this idea that a lot of us have known for a long time, that there is no not racist. There is no non-racist. You're either contributing to racism or you're pushing against racism.
Basically, it's pretty clear that our education system is sick, just like the health of America is sick, and it needs to be corrected. Speaking of a sick health culture in America, here's some more from RFK's approval and his swearing in into the position of the Director of Health and Human Services, and talking about, again, calling Trump a hero and talking about the health of America and how poor it is. So we've talked about our education system being sick. Now we got to talk about our physical health, mental health crisis that's in America that RFK says he's been praying on his knees to be able to come in and fix. And thank God that Donald Trump is here to allow him to come in and ask the right questions to bring transparency and trust back to the institutions of America.
For 20 years, I've gotten up every morning on my knees and prayed that God would put me in a position where I can end the childhood chronic disease epidemic in this country. On August 23rd of last year, God sent me President Trump. And he gave me he's now given me, he's kept every promise that he's made to me. He's kept his word in every account and gone way beyond it. I'm so grateful to you, Mr. President. A lot of people told me that I couldn't trust President Trump, that I better get it in writing. And we did a handshake, and everything that he told me he was going to do, he has done. And I'm so grateful to him, and I've told you before, I genuinely believe that you are a pivotal historical figure, and you are going to transform this country at a time when we see all of the indicia of democracy now in tatters in our country. We see the rise of the military-industrial complex, the rise of totalitarianism, these attacks on our Constitution, and this breathtaking epidemic that is disabling our people. President Trump has promised to restore the American dream in this country. A healthy person has 1,000 dreams. A sick person only has one. 60% of our population has only one dream, that they get better. President Trump has promised that he's going to restore America's strength. But we can't be a strong nation if we have a weak citizenry. If people are sick, 60% of our people are sick, 77%, as President Trump mentioned, of our children cannot qualify for military service. And we need a man on a white horse now. We need somebody who is willing to come in and has the spine and the guts and the strength to challenge orthodoxies, to stand in the way of vested interests, and to break institutions that have turned against our democracy. President Trump has shown again and again that he is that hero. And most recently, I greatly appreciate it, and I called you the day that you announced the termination of USAID. My uncle started USAID in 1961 for humanitarian purposes, to put our country on the side of the poor. It has been captured by the military-industrial complex. it has become a sinister propagator of totalitarianism and war across the globe. And very few people understand how sinister this agency really is. And President Trump saw that, and he stood up to it with a masterstroke. And we want to do the same thing with the institutions that are stealing the health of our children. We need a revolutionary figure, and you are that figure, and I'm very grateful for you for giving me this opportunity.
I just love it. Donald Trump stands over there and takes the compliments with such class. He's, for a guy who has arguably a big ego, he also has a lot of class in the right situations. And he uses these tactics very skillfully. RFK articulates his plans for the HHS and for restoring trust in not only the healthcare system, but the government, science, and, the medical system in general. Here's another interview that he did talking about some of his plans and, some of the concerns people have about him removing vaccines or the availability of vaccines, which he has never claimed that he's going to do. But he does want to do some research into it, due diligence into the safety of a lot of these vaccines that may have been rushed or not properly vetted.
Profile is for these products.
Do you think the COVID vaccine was safe and the boosters were safe? I mean, a lot of people don't talk about adverse effects.
We don't have good data on it, and that is a crime. The fact that we don't have a surveillance system that actually works. In 2010, CDC has a surveillance system called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And it's supposed to pick up injuries. But CDC did a study of that system in 2010. And that study said, and this is a published study by CDC, that it captures less than 1% of the vaccine injuries. That's inexcusable. Congress has repeatedly, and the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Sciences, have repeatedly ordered CDC to put together a better vaccine.
Will you require it?
And we will do that right away.
There's rumors out there that as many as 50% of the employees of HHS will be cut in the restructuring of government that DOJ is helping President Trump carry out. And people are wringing their hands. Your response to that?
I don't know anything about 50% of people being cut. There's 90,000 employees.
So he talks about the, ineffectiveness of government and the inability of the government to track vaccine injuries. And I would argue even the unwillingness of the government to track vaccine injuries. Is there even the motivation there? Or has there been in the past? I would argue no. I mean, the government has pushed so hard for these vaccines to be really forced upon a lot of the American public. And so what would the benefit be to the government or even, some of these protected institutions or companies like Pfizer, who makes a lot of these vaccines? What is the incentive for the government to collect complaints about those and do something with it? There really is none. So RFK said he's going to come in and he's going to fix the system and he's going to make sure that we have a way of tracking damages and not just assuming that everything works perfectly, which I think is not too much to ask from our government. In fact, it should be expected from our government. One of their missions is to protect us, protect our rights, protect our right to just have a healthy, well, not even the right to health, because I don't want to say that, but you should have a right to not have dangerous things forced upon you. That is what we should have the right for. So RFK is going to look into these things. He's talking about cuts. He's questioned about cuts at the HHS. He says, I don't know about that. Of course he doesn't know about that. I mean, they haven't really been investigated by DOJ yet. I'm sure it's coming. I'm sure there will be cuts because, like I said, there is a diseconomy of size in the government. It's clear that it is bloated. There is way too much money spent. There's way too many employees that aren't even showing up to work. Who knows what they're doing when they're not showing up to work? And there needs to be more investigation in how to make these things more efficient. So, I mean, it just needs to be done, and it's pretty clear. So it's also good to see that we have strength back in the White House, and not only in the form of Donald Trump, but also in J.D. Vance. He is now speaking in front of these European countries, their leaders, and talking about the fact that they have been suppressing the freedom of speech in their country. And, you know, we've seen how powerful of a speaker he is, not only in the first debate, but also in the AI summit that he was attending just a couple days ago. Now, I didn't know who J.D. Vance was before he was picked by Donald Trump as his vice president. And it was funny because I was reading an ex-post by Gina Carano today that was talking about the same thing. She echoed my sentiment perfectly, that, like she said, I didn't know who she was, who J.D. Vance was, not even, 6, 7, 8 months ago. And now I realized, I mean, the first time you heard him talk, it was so obvious that he's such a powerful candidate. He is the future of the GOP, I believe. And, you know, Donald Trump says things like, oh, I don't know, when he's asked if he's his, you know, the person who's going to follow up after him. And he says, you know, has hinted at maybe a third term or something like that. But that's all silliness. Obviously, J.D. Vance is the person who's probably most likely to follow up after Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is just trying to throw messages out there so that he doesn't have a lame 4 years in presidency, and he still has his negotiating power to push things forward with his bully pulpit, with executive orders, and with the power of Congress, which he has a majority in so far. So it's good to see that J.D. Vance is willing to stand up in front of these European leaders and tell them that we are the leader of the world. We recognize free speech in our country, and they must do the same instead of continuing on their path of silencing their own citizens, jailing their own citizens for speaking up and saying things that aren't criminal, you know, and talking about the importance of freedom of speech. Because we all know that totalitarian regimes, authoritarian regimes, always start with restricting freedom of speech. And that is critical in maintaining a free democracy anywhere in the world. Here's him speaking on that.
And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
And he brought the receipts, man. He came out with clear examples. He was pointing out specific countries, specific news stories that were out in the public. I mean, I've heard almost all these stories, and he pointed them out and said, these are the things that are egregious, that are breaking the basic fundamentals of a free democracy, which most of these countries claim to be, if not all. And he says, it's not okay. You got to stop. The United States, we set the example. We are leading on this. And if you're going to be able to play ball with us, we're going to call you out if you're not going to respect the freedom of speech of your citizens. And good for him. Again, a very strong speech, powerful speech, and one that demonstrates that the United States is back as the leading power of the world and the leading guidance of morality in the world. The last topic is going to be looking into some of these government officials now who are trying to protect illegal immigrants. And we already talked about New York State, and that is a clear violation. There's a lot of sanctuary cities that have been in violation. Trump and Homan met with Eric Adams in New York City today, and they had some good discussions about establishing a place in Rikers Island in order to house some of these illegal immigrants, especially the serious criminals, which obviously need to be taken off the streets. And so that's going to move forward. Eric Adams has become an ally to the Trump administration, and I would not be surprised if he switches his affiliation to the GOP very soon. And I guess I'd be happy to see it. I mean, we got to take our wins, right? And maybe the only GOP mayor we have in New York City for who knows how long, because I don't know if there's anything saving that area. But they need to team up against these corrupt state officials like Letitia James and Kathy Hochul. It needs to happen. So in that same right, we've got the also brilliant, at least she thinks so, brilliant AOC, who the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, who has hosted a webinar for how illegal immigrants can evade ICE. Here's some of that.
To turn people over to ICE when they're being released from custody. One way they do this is by issuing something called a detainer or an detainer, because someone ends up on ICE's radar and ICE believes they see one under the law, which could include a public area of a workplace. So that could be the front of a restaurant or something where anyone from the public can walk in. That unmarked ICE vehicles will stop cars as people are driving to work or to home. We've heard reports of arrests for people checking in with ICE, so people who are under something called an order of supervision or who are under an alternative to detention, like an ankle monitor or something like that. In some places outside of New York City, people are arrested during check-ins with probation or at appointments with parole. We've also heard of transfers directly from police or criminal custody in places outside of New York City to ICE. And when ICE agents make arrests, it's usually teams of agents. So it could be anywhere from 2 or 3 agents to a group of 8 agents. They're often very aggressive, and the encounters can happen really quickly. And we're going to talk more about this in detail, but sometimes when ICE goes to a home or they stop people on the street or in a car, it's not always clear that it's ICE agents who are actually stopping the individual. And so we're going to talk about what your rights are when you have contact with someone and you're not actually sure who it is, if it's local police or ICE.
So clearly this is ridiculous. We can't have lawmakers standing in the face of the federal government, standing in the face of ICE and poking their finger in there and saying, we're going to defy the law. You can't have it. Guess what, AOC? You don't like it. Go through the process and change the law. But guess what? You're not going to have the votes because the American people don't want this. That was clear in the last election. That was one of the top popular items that people voted on in this last election. And Donald Trump won with a clear mandate to clean it up. He had to clean up your mess. So you want to go stand outside of a fence, outside of a parking lot somewhere and pretend to cry for these immigrants that you're enticing to go through dangerous pathways to come to America? Guess what? You can do that. But you're a hypocrite and you're wrong. And you're breaking the law. And I hope they come after you for it. Legally speaking. Not violently like you guys like to do. Anyways, that's all I got. Stay vigilant. Pay attention. Most importantly, go out and volunteer for something very important to you and to the world. And also, don't forget to spark the conversation.